Hi, I'm Althea. 3 years ago, my own mother looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're a complete disappointment. Get out of our lives and don't come back until you actually become somebody." Last week, I handed her an eviction notice for the apartment she's lived in for 15 years. The apartment I now own, along with the entire building. Have you ever been told you'd never amount to anything by the people who were supposed to believe in you most? Stick around. You're going to want to hear how I proved them all wrong in the most satisfying way possible. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Denver, I was always the odd one out in the Morrison family. My mother Patricia was a bank manager who wore pressed suits and measured success by the size of your paycheck. My father Robert worked in insurance, the kind of man who could quote policy numbers from memory and believed that taking risks was just another word for being irresponsible. My older brother Michael was their golden child, a mechanical engineer who bought his first house at 25. My younger sister Jessica was pursuing her MBA while working at a prestigious consulting firm. Then there was me, Althea Morrison, the family disappointment who spent too much time on her computer and had dreams that didn't fit into their neat little boxes. I'd always been fascinated by technology, spending hours teaching myself programming languages while my family watched television downstairs. In high school, I built websites for local businesses, created apps that solved small problems, and dreamed of starting my own tech company. My parents saw this as a hobby, a phase I'd grow out of once I got serious about my future. "You need to study something practical," my mother would say, setting down brochures for accounting and business administration programs. "This computer nonsense isn't a real career path. You need stability, Althea. You need something dependable." But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was meant for something bigger. While my siblings followed traditional paths, I enrolled at the University of Colorado Boulder to study computer science, much to my family's dismay. They made it clear that they thought I was wasting my time and their money. College was where I first tasted real freedom. Away from my family's constant criticism, I thrived. I joined coding competitions, participated in hackathons, and spent countless nights in the computer lab working on projects that excited me. My professors recognized my talent, and I began to believe that maybe I wasn't the failure my family thought I was. During my junior year, I met David Chen, a visiting professor who had sold 2 startups to major tech companies. He saw something in my work that even I didn't fully recognize. "You have an intuitive understanding of user experience," he told me after I presented a project on streamlining online payment systems. "Most programmers focus on making things work. You focus on making things work beautifully." David became my mentor, encouraging me to think beyond just writing code to actually solving real problems that people faced every day. Under his guidance, I started developing an idea for a platform that would revolutionize how small businesses manage their online presence. It wasn't just another website builder or social media tool. It was an integrated system that would handle everything from inventory management to customer communications, designed specifically for entrepreneurs who didn't have technical backgrounds. I spent my entire senior year refining the concept, building prototypes, and testing them with local business owners. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, but when I tried to share my excitement with my family during holiday visits, their reactions were predictably discouraging. "That's nice, honey," my mother would say in the tone she reserved for humoring children. "But you should probably start thinking about getting a real job after graduation. Michael's company is hiring, you know. You could start in their IT department." My father was more direct. "These tech startups you read about are lottery tickets, Althea. For every success story, there are thousands of failures." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. You need to be realistic about your capabilities. Even my siblings, who I'd hoped might be more supportive, seemed to view my ambitions as naive fantasies. Michael would pat my shoulder and suggest I keep it as a side project, while building a stable career foundation. Jessica would nod along, adding that she'd learned in business school about the importance of managing risk and having realistic expectations. Their doubt was like a constant weight on my shoulders, but it also fueled something fierce inside me. I graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in computer science and a minor in business. Instead of celebrating my achievements, my family's first question was when I was going to start applying for real jobs. I had saved every penny from my part-time work throughout college, lived on ramen noodles and coffee, and had managed to accumulate a small nest egg. Instead of using it for a security deposit on an apartment and job hunting like my family expected, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to build my startup. The day I told my family I was turning down a job offer from a stable tech company to pursue my own venture, you would have thought I announced I was joining a cult. We were gathered in the living room of their apartment at Riverside Heights Complex, the same cramped 3-bedroom space where I'd grown up feeling like I never quite belonged. "You're going to what?" My mother's voice pitched higher with each word. "Althea, you can't be serious. You're throwing away a guaranteed salary to chase some pipe dream?" My father set down his coffee cup with enough force to make the table shake. "This is exactly the kind of impractical thinking we've been worried about. You need to grow up and face reality." "It's not a pipe dream," I insisted, pulling out my laptop to show them the demo I'd been perfecting. "I've already got interest from potential clients. The market research shows there's a real need for this kind of integrated platform." But they weren't listening. Michael shook his head like I was a child refusing to eat vegetables. "Althea, 90% of startups fail in the first year. You have a good degree now. Why would you risk that on something so uncertain?" Jessica leaned forward with that concerned expression she'd perfected in her consulting training. "Maybe you could develop this as a side project while you build your resume at an established company. That would be the smart approach. The smart approach. The safe approach. The approach that would keep me small and manageable, and fitting into their limited vision of what my life should look like." I felt something crack inside me, a dam that had been holding back years of frustration and disappointment. "What if I don't want the smart approach?" I said, closing my laptop. "What if I want to actually try to build something meaningful instead of just settling for what's expected?" The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged one of those looks that married couples perfect over decades, the kind that communicates entire conversations without words. My father cleared his throat. "Althea, we love you, but we're concerned that you're not thinking clearly about your future. This family has always valued hard work and responsibility. We've all built our careers through steady, practical choices. And where has that gotten any of you?" The words came out harsher than I intended, but I couldn't stop them. "You're all stuck in the same jobs you've had for years, living in the same apartment, following the same routines. When was the last time any of you took a real risk or tried to create something new?" My mother's face flushed red. "How dare you speak to us like that? We've sacrificed to give you opportunities we never had. We've supported you through college, and this is how you repay us? By insulting our choices and throwing your future away on some fantasy?" "I'm not throwing anything away," I said, standing up. "I'm trying to build something. I'm trying to create value and solve problems, and maybe, just maybe, prove that there's more to success than climbing someone else's ladder." Robert stood up too, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when he was closing the discussion. "Enough. You're being selfish and unrealistic. If you want to act like a child and make foolish decisions, you can do it somewhere else. We won't enable this nonsense." "What's that supposed to mean?" Patricia's voice was ice cold. "It means that if you're so determined to reject everything we've taught you about responsibility and practical living, then you can figure out how to support yourself completely. No more help with rent, no more family dinners where you try to convince us that your latest scheme is going to work out. You want to be an adult? Then act like one." The room felt like it was spinning. This was my family, the people who were supposed to support me unconditionally, and they were essentially disowning me because I dared to want something different than what they'd planned for my life. Michael tried to play mediator. "Look, maybe everyone should calm down. Althea, maybe you could take some time to think about this more carefully." But Jessica shook her head. "No, Michael. She's made it clear that she thinks our way of living is beneath her, that our values don't matter. Maybe mom and dad are right. Maybe she needs to learn what the real world is like without a safety net. I looked around the room at these people who shared my DNA but felt like complete strangers. My mother's arms were crossed, her expression set in that stubborn line I knew meant there would be no reasoning with her. My father was already turning away, dismissing me like a failed business proposal. My siblings were nodding along, convinced that tough love was what I needed to snap out of my delusions. "Fine," I said quietly. "If that's how you feel, then I guess we have nothing more to discuss." I went to my childhood bedroom and packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Photos from high school, books I'd accumulated over the years, the laptop that contained my dreams, and all my work. It wasn't much, which somehow made it even more pathetic. As I wheeled my suitcases toward the front door, my mother called out one last time. "Althea, this doesn't have to be permanent. When you come to your senses and decide to be practical about your future, we'll be here." I turned back to look at her, this woman who had raised me but never really seen me. What if I don't come to my senses? What if I actually succeed? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Honey, we've watched you dream big your whole life. You're smart, but you're not special. The world is full of smart people with big dreams who end up disappointed. We're trying to save you from that heartbreak. You're not special." Those words would echo in my head for years to come, sometimes as motivation, sometimes as doubt, but always as a reminder of the moment my family gave up on me completely. I left that night and didn't look back. I used my savings to rent a tiny studio apartment in Boulder, close to the university where David Chen had offered to let me use lab space while I developed my platform. For the first few weeks, I questioned everything. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was being naive and impractical. Maybe I should swallow my pride, apologize, and find a safe job that would allow me to move back into their good graces. But every time I opened my laptop and saw the code I'd been writing, every time I thought about the small business owners who had tested my early prototypes and told me how much it could help them, I remembered why I was doing this. I wasn't just building a company. I was building proof that they were wrong about me. The first 6 months were brutal. I lived on instant noodles and coffee, worked 18-hour days, and learned every aspect of running a business, from accounting to marketing to legal compliance. David introduced me to other entrepreneurs who became informal mentors, teaching me lessons you can't learn in any classroom about persistence, adaptation, and the psychology of building something from nothing. I reached out to my family exactly once during this period, sending a group text on my birthday. "Hope everyone is well. Missing you all." The responses were polite but distant. Michael sent back a simple, "Happy birthday." Jessica wrote, "Hope you're doing okay." My parents didn't respond at all. That silence told me everything I needed to know about where I stood with them. I was on my own, completely and utterly, in a way that felt both terrifying and liberating. By month 8, I had my first paying client, a local coffee shop that needed help integrating their inventory system with their online ordering platform. It wasn't the big breakthrough I'd dreamed of, but it was validation that my platform could solve real problems for real people. More importantly, it was revenue. I threw myself into that first client success with everything I had. I spent hours in their shop, watching how customers interacted with their systems, identifying pain points I hadn't anticipated, and continuously refining my platform based on their feedback. When their online orders increased by 40% in the first month after implementation, and their inventory waste decreased by 25%, I knew I was onto something significant. Word spread through Boulder's small business community faster than I'd expected. The coffee shop owner recommended me to a friend who ran a boutique clothing store. She recommended me to someone who managed a small chain of fitness studios. Each new client brought unique challenges that pushed me to expand and improve my platform, turning it from a simple tool into a comprehensive solution that could adapt to almost any type of small business. But the real breakthrough came when Maya Rodriguez, who had become my closest friend and unofficial business advisor, suggested I stop thinking locally and start thinking regionally. Maya had graduated from CU's business school and was working at a startup accelerator in Denver. She'd been watching my progress and believed I was ready to scale. "You've proven your concept works," she told me over dinner at our usual cheap Thai place. "You've got happy clients, you're solving real problems, and your technology is solid. It's time to think bigger." She introduced me to Tom Chen, a venture capitalist who specialized in early-stage tech companies. Tom wasn't related to David, despite the shared last name, but he had a similar ability to see potential where others saw risk. After reviewing my platform, my client testimonials, and my financial projections, he offered something I'd never dared to hope for: serious investment capital. "Your customer retention rate is exceptional," he told me during our third meeting. "Your clients aren't just using your platform, they're growing their businesses with it. That's the kind of value creation that scales." The investment gave me the resources to hire my first employees, expand my marketing efforts, and begin targeting clients beyond Colorado. I moved my operations to a small office space in Denver, closer to the startup ecosystem Tom had introduced me to, and began building the team that would help me take the company national. Within 18 months of leaving my family's apartment, I had 12 employees, clients in 6 states, and revenue that exceeded what my father made in a year at his insurance company. But I didn't reach out to my family to share the news. Their last words to me had made it clear that they would only consider my success legitimate if it came through channels they understood and approved of. A tech startup, no matter how successful, would still be a risky venture in their minds. I was right to wait. When the company hit our first $1 million in annual revenue, I finally sent another text to the family group chat. "Business is going well. Hope everyone is healthy and happy." Michael responded first. "That's great, Althea. Are you ready to start thinking about a more stable career path now?" It was like a punch to the gut. Even with concrete evidence of success, they still saw my work as a phase, a temporary deviation from the responsible path they expected me to eventually return to. I didn't respond to Michael's text. Instead, I doubled down on growing the business. If financial success wasn't enough to prove my worth to them, then I would build something so undeniably successful that they couldn't dismiss it. The second year brought challenges I hadn't anticipated. Larger competitors began to take notice of our market share and started developing competing platforms. I had to learn how to defend our position while continuing to innovate, how to manage a larger team while maintaining the scrappy culture that had gotten us this far, and how to balance the demands of investors with my original vision for the company. There were nights when I wondered if my parents had been right about the risks I was taking. When we lost our biggest client to a competitor with deeper pockets, when a key employee quit to start their own company, when technical glitches threatened to damage our reputation, I questioned whether the security of a traditional job might have been worth the trade-off. But each challenge also brought growth. Losing that big client forced us to diversify our customer base and build more resilient revenue streams. The employee who left taught me the importance of equity structures and retention strategies. The technical problems pushed us to build more robust systems and better support processes. By the end of year 2, we had weathered every storm that had come our way and emerged stronger. Our platform was more sophisticated, our team was more experienced, and our market position was more secure than ever. When Tom suggested it might be time to consider acquisition offers from larger companies, I realized how far we'd come from that tiny studio apartment, where I'd questioned everything about my future. The acquisition discussions were surreal. Companies that had ignored us when we were small were now offering tens of millions of dollars for the platform and team we'd built. Maya, who had joined as my business partner during our first year, helped me navigate the complex negotiations and decisions about our company's future. "Remember why you started this," she reminded me during one particularly intense week of meetings with potential acquirers. "You wanted to prove that you could build something meaningful. You wanted to show that taking risks could pay off. You've done that. Now the question is what you want to do next." What I wanted to do next surprised even me. I didn't want to sell to the highest bidder and walk away. I wanted to stay involved, to keep building, to use our success as a platform for even bigger innovations. When we finally accepted an acquisition offer, it was from a company that shared our vision and wanted to keep our team intact as an autonomous division focused on small business solutions. The financial terms of the deal meant that at 26 years old, I had more money than I knew what to do with. But more important than the money was the validation. We'd built something that industry leaders considered valuable enough to pay premium prices for. We'd created jobs, helped small businesses grow, and proven that sometimes the risky path is actually the smartest one. 3 years had passed since I'd left my family's apartment with 2 suitcases and a dream they'd dismissed as impractical nonsense. 3 years of 18-hour days, constant learning, failures and recoveries, and building something from absolutely nothing. 3 years of proving to myself that their assessment of my potential had been completely wrong. It was time to go home. I didn't call ahead to announce my return to Denver. I wanted to see the city with fresh eyes, to walk the streets where I'd grown up feeling like I didn't belong, and see how different they looked now that I belonged to myself. The coffee shop where I'd gotten my first client had expanded to 3 locations. The boutique that had been my second client now had an online presence that reached customers across the Mountain West. Everywhere I looked, I could see the ripple effects of the work we'd done. But before I contacted my family, I had some research to do. Riverside Heights Complex, the apartment building where they still lived, had always been a decent middle-class housing option. 3-bedroom units, reasonable rent, professional management. What I discovered through some discreet inquiries was that the building's ownership group was looking to sell. The math was simple enough. After the acquisition, even after taxes and profit sharing with my team, I had more than enough capital to make a competitive offer. More than enough to buy the entire building, including the apartment where my family had told me I'd never amount to anything. The idea wasn't about revenge, exactly. It was about completing a circle, about standing in the same place where they'd dismissed my dreams, and being able to say definitively that they'd been wrong. It was about having the conversation we should have had 3 years ago, but this time with all the evidence on my side. Maya thought I was crazy when I told her about my plan. "You've already proven your point," she said. "You don't need to buy their building to show them you've succeeded." But she didn't understand the psychology of it, the way their doubt had become fuel for every difficult decision I'd made over the past 3 years. Buying the building wasn't about showing off my wealth. It was about demonstrating the value of the vision they'd rejected, the dreams they'd dismissed, the risks they'd been too afraid to let me take. The purchase process took 2 months of negotiations, inspections, and legal paperwork. I used a management company to handle the transaction, so my name never appeared in any documents the tenants would see. As far as my family knew, Riverside Heights had simply been sold to a new ownership group with updated management policies. Sarah Miller, the real estate agent who handled the purchase, couldn't understand why I wanted to buy a middle-income apartment building when I could afford much more luxurious properties. "It's not exactly a prestige investment," she pointed out during our final walkthrough. "It's not about prestige," I told her, looking up at the windows of Unit 4B where my family still lived. "It's about coming full circle." The building was mine by early December, just in time for the holidays. I spent weeks reviewing tenant files, maintenance reports, and financial records, learning everything there was to know about the property and the people who lived there. My family were model tenants, always paid on time, never caused problems. They'd lived in the same apartment for over 15 years, steadily building the kind of stable, predictable life they'd always valued. I wondered if they'd changed at all in the 3 years since I'd left. If they ever thought about me, and whether I'd succeeded or failed in my impractical pursuit of building something meaningful. If they'd seen any news coverage of our company's acquisition, and wondered if that Althea Morrison was the same daughter and sister they'd dismissed. Christmas was approaching, and I knew they'd all be gathering in that familiar living room where they'd made it clear I was no longer welcome. It seemed like the perfect time to reintroduce myself to their lives, but this time as their landlord rather than their disappointing family member. I scheduled the meeting for December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. I told them through the management company that the new owner wanted to meet with long-term tenants to discuss building policies and future plans. They probably expected some corporate representative or investment group official. They definitely didn't expect me. I stood outside Mountain View Cafe at 9:45 a.m. on December 23rd, watching my breath create small clouds in the crisp Denver air. The coffee shop was busy with holiday shoppers and people escaping their family obligations for a few minutes of caffeinated peace. Through the large windows, I could see my parents already seated at a corner table checking their watches with the punctuality that had defined their entire lives. They looked older than I remembered. My mother's hair had more silver threading through the brown, and she'd developed worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 3 years ago. My father's posture seemed more rigid, if that was possible, And he kept adjusting his glasses in a nervous habit I'd never noticed before. They were both dressed in their best casual clothes, the kind of outfits they wore to parent-teacher conferences and bank meetings, occasions that required looking respectable but not formal. I had chosen my own outfit carefully that morning. A well-tailored navy blazer over dark jeans, professional but not intimidating, successful but not flashy. The kind of look that would immediately signal that I'd done well for myself without screaming about money. I wanted them to draw their own conclusions before I revealed exactly how well things had turned out. Maya had offered to come with me for moral support, but this was something I needed to do alone. She'd spent the previous evening helping me practice what I wanted to say, role-playing different scenarios based on how my family might react to seeing me again. We'd prepared for anger, for coldness, for attempts to guilt me into apologizing for leaving. What we hadn't really prepared for was the possibility that they might be genuinely happy to see me. I pushed open the cafe door, setting off the small bell that announced new customers. The familiar smell of coffee beans and pastries hit me immediately, along with a wave of memories from all the times I'd studied in coffee shops during college, dreaming about the future I was now living. My parents looked up at the sound of the bell, and I watched their expressions change from polite expectation to complete shock. My mother's hand flew to her throat, a gesture I remembered from every time something had surprised or upset her during my childhood. My father simply stared, his mouth slightly open, as if he couldn't quite process what he was seeing. For a moment, none of us moved. Then my mother stood up so quickly that her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Althea?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" I walked over to their table, my heart pounding in a way that reminded me of every presentation I'd ever given to potential investors. "Hello, Mom. Dad, thank you for meeting with me." My father finally found his voice. "Meeting with you? We're supposed to be meeting with someone from the management company about building policies." "I know," I said, sitting down in the empty chair across from them. "That someone is me." The silence that followed was deafening, even in the busy cafe. I could see them processing my words, trying to make sense of what I'd just said. My mother slowly sank back into her chair, her eyes never leaving my face. "I don't understand," she said finally. "You're working for the management company." "Not exactly." I signaled to the barista, ordering a cappuccino to buy myself a few more moments to gauge their reactions. "I own the management company. And the building. I bought Riverside Heights Complex 2 months ago." If I'd thrown ice water in their faces, I don't think the shock could have been more complete. My father's face went through several different shades of pale before settling on a grayish white that made me worry about his blood pressure. My mother just stared at me like I'd announced I was an alien from another planet. "That's impossible," my father said finally. "Do you have any idea how much that building is worth? The purchase price alone would be millions of dollars. $7.2 million, to be exact," I replied calmly. "Plus another $500,000 for renovations and updates I'm planning for the coming year." My mother shook her head slowly. "Althea, what kind of game are you playing? This isn't funny." I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder containing the property deed, loan documents, and official papers that proved my ownership. I set it on the table between us, watching as they stared at the legal documents that bore my name and signature. "It's not a game, Mom. I'm the new owner of your building. I'm your landlord." My father picked up the deed with trembling hands, studying every line as if he could find some evidence that it was forged or fake. His background in insurance had given him enough experience with legal documents to recognize the real thing when he saw it. After several minutes of scrutiny, he set the paper down and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "How?" he asked simply. That one word contained so many questions. How had I accumulated that kind of wealth? How had I managed to buy their building without them knowing? How had the daughter they dismissed as impractical and unrealistic become someone capable of such a massive purchase? "I built a company," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "The same company I was trying to tell you about 3 years ago when you decided I wasn't worth supporting anymore. We developed a platform that helps small businesses manage their operations more efficiently. Last month, we were acquired by TechFlow Solutions for $42 million. The numbers seemed to hang in the air between us. $42 million. More money than my parents would see in several lifetimes of their careful, responsible careers. Money that had come from exactly the kind of risky, impractical venture they'd been so certain would end in failure. My mother was the first to find her voice. $42 million? That's impossible. You were just a college student with some computer hobby. You don't just become a millionaire overnight from playing around with websites. It wasn't overnight, I said quietly. And it wasn't playing around. It was 3 years of 18-hour days, 7 days a week. 3 years of learning every aspect of running a business, from coding and product development to marketing and financial planning. 3 years of building something that actually helps people solve real problems. I pulled out my phone and showed them the TechFlow Solutions press release announcing the acquisition. Their company photos showed me standing with Maya and the rest of our team, all of us smiling as we held a ceremonial check for an amount that dwarfed anything my family had ever imagined possible. This is real, I continued, watching their faces as they read the article. The company is real, the acquisition is real, and the money is real. Real enough to buy your building. Real enough to make me your landlord. Real enough to prove that maybe you were wrong about my potential. My father set down the phone and rubbed his temples like he was getting a headache. I don't understand how this happened. How did you even survive those first few months after you left? You had no money, no job, no support system. The question stung because it highlighted exactly how little they'd cared about my welfare when they'd essentially kicked me out. They'd been so confident that I would fail and come crawling back that they'd never bothered to wonder whether I was eating regularly or had a safe place to sleep. I survived the same way people have always survived when their families abandon them, I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life. I lived on instant noodles and coffee for months. I slept on Maya's couch when I couldn't afford rent. I did whatever it took to build something meaningful, instead of giving up and accepting the limited future you'd planned for me. My mother's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from guilt or from the shock of learning how wrong they'd been about my prospects. We weren't abandoning you, she said defensively. We were trying to teach you about responsibility, about the importance of making practical decisions. By cutting me off completely, by making it clear that your love and support were conditional on me following the exact path you'd chosen for my life? I shook my head. That's not teaching responsibility. That's emotional manipulation. The accusation hung heavy between us. I could see my father processing my words, perhaps recognizing for the first time how their ultimatum had felt from my perspective. My mother looked like she wanted to argue, to defend their actions as necessary tough love, but the evidence of my success made her usual arguments seem hollow. We thought you were making a mistake, my father said slowly. We thought you were throwing away your education and your future on something that would never work out. We see people make bad financial decisions all the time in our work. We were trying to protect you from that kind of failure. Protect me? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourselves from having to watch me succeed in a way that didn't fit your narrow definition of what success should look like. The barista brought my cappuccino, providing a momentary interruption to the tension at our table. I took a sip, using the time to study my parents' faces. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the realization that their judgment had been so fundamentally wrong. Where are Michael and Jessica? I asked, noticing that my siblings weren't part of this meeting. Don't they live in the building anymore? Michael bought a house in the suburbs last year, my mother said quietly. Jessica got married and moved to Phoenix with her husband. They have their own lives now. The way she said their own lives made it clear that she still didn't consider my life to be legitimate, even with all the evidence sitting on the table between us. It was a reminder that success alone might not be enough to change their fundamental perception of who I was and what I was capable of. Do they know about this meeting? I asked. Do they know I'm back in Denver? My parents exchanged a look that I recognized from childhood, the silent communication of people who'd been together so long they could have entire conversations without words. We haven't spoken to them about you in a while, my father admitted. They ask about you sometimes, but we never know what to tell them. We haven't heard from you in over 2 years. Because the last time I reached out, Michael asked if I was ready to get a real job, I reminded him. Even when I told you the business was doing well, you treated it like a phase I'd eventually grow out of. I pulled out another document from my folder, a profit and loss statement from our company's final year before the acquisition. The revenue numbers were clearly visible, showing monthly income that exceeded what most people made in a year. This was our revenue in the last 12 months before the sale, I said, pointing to the totals. We were helping over 3,000 small businesses across 12 states manage their operations more efficiently. We had 47 employees, offices in 3 cities, and were growing by 30% year over year. Does that sound like a hobby to you? My mother studied the financial statements with the analytical skills she'd developed in her banking career. I could see her processing the numbers, understanding for the first time the scale of what we'd built. Her expertise made it impossible for her to dismiss the documents as somehow misleading or exaggerated. "My God," she whispered, "you really did build something significant." "I tried to tell you that 3 years ago," I said. "I tried to share my vision with you, to get you excited about what I was working on. But you'd already decided it wasn't worth your time or attention." My father leaned back in his chair, looking like a man whose fundamental assumptions about the world had just been shattered. "We were wrong," he said quietly. "We were completely wrong about your business, about your potential, about everything." It was the apology I'd been waiting 3 years to hear, but hearing it now felt strangely hollow. The vindication I'd expected to feel was overshadowed by sadness about all the time we'd lost, all the conversations we'd never had, all the milestones they'd missed because they'd been too stubborn to admit they might have misjudged me. "Yes, you were wrong," I agreed. "But the question now is what we do with that information." My mother reached across the table, hesitating before placing her hand over mine. Her touch felt foreign after 3 years of no contact, but also familiar in a way that reminded me of being a child with a scraped knee, seeking comfort from someone who'd always been able to make things better. "We want to make this right," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We want to have our daughter back in our lives. We've missed you so much, Althea. We've missed watching you grow and succeed. We've missed being part of your journey." The words I'd dreamed of hearing for 3 years were finally being spoken, but they came with complications I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't the same person who'd left their apartment with 2 suitcases and a head full of dreams. I'd been shaped by years of independence, by the confidence that came from proving doubters wrong, by the knowledge that I could survive and thrive without their approval or support. "I've missed you too," I admitted. "But I'm not the same person who left here 3 years ago. I can't just pretend that what happened didn't matter, that your lack of faith in me didn't change our relationship fundamentally." My father nodded slowly. "We understand that. We know we have to earn your trust back. We know we have to prove that we can support you and believe in you the way we should have from the beginning." The conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing with a text message. It was from Tom, my former investor who'd become a close advisor and friend. The message was simple but significant. "Netflix wants to discuss a documentary about female entrepreneurs in tech. They specifically mentioned your story. Interested?" I stared at the message, struck by the irony of the timing. Here I was, sitting with parents who had just discovered my success, while simultaneously being invited to share that success story with a national audience. The contrast between their years of doubt and the broader recognition of what I'd accomplished was almost too perfect to be real. "Is everything okay?" my mother asked, noticing my distraction. I turned the phone screen toward them, showing them Tom's message. "That's from my former investor. Netflix wants to discuss making a documentary about my company and my journey as a female entrepreneur in tech." The impact of this information was immediately visible on their faces. A documentary meant national recognition, meant that my story would be told to millions of people, meant that their daughter wasn't just successful but significant enough to warrant that level of attention. "Netflix?" my father repeated, as if saying the name would help him process the magnitude of what I'd achieved. "They want to make a documentary about you?" "About my journey, yes. About how I built a company from nothing, overcame challenges in a male-dominated industry, and eventually achieved a successful exit. It's part of a series they're developing about entrepreneurs who've disrupted traditional business models. I could see them struggling to reconcile this information with their long-held beliefs about my capabilities and potential. Their daughter, who they'd dismissed as impractical and unrealistic, was being courted by one of the world's largest entertainment companies to tell her success story. "We had no idea," my mother said quietly. "We had no idea how far you'd come, how much you'd accomplished. We've been living in the same small world, focused on the same small concerns, while you've been out there building something extraordinary." The admission felt like a watershed moment, the first time either of them had acknowledged that their limited vision might have prevented them from recognizing my potential. It was also the first time they'd seemed to understand that my success wasn't just about money, but about creating something meaningful that others wanted to learn from and emulate. "I need you to understand something," I said, setting my phone down and leaning forward. "I didn't buy your building as some kind of revenge plot. I didn't come here today to humiliate you or to prove how wrong you were. I came because I needed to know if we could rebuild our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect, instead of conditional approval." My parents nodded, seeming to sense the importance of this moment. The next few minutes would determine whether we could move forward together or whether the damage from 3 years of separation was too significant to repair. "I've spent 3 years learning to value myself independent of your opinions," I continued. "I've learned to trust my own judgment, to take risks based on my own analysis, to define success on my own terms. I can't go back to being the daughter who needed your permission to pursue her dreams." "We don't want you to go back," my father said firmly. "We want to get to know the woman you've become. We want to understand your world, your business, your vision for the future. We want to be part of your life again, but on your terms, not ours." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, but I'd learned to be cautious about promises made in moments of high emotion. People could say they'd changed, could acknowledge their mistakes, could promise to do better, but real change required consistent actions over time. "I'd like that," I said carefully. "But it's going to require some fundamental shifts in how our family relates to each other. You can't treat me like a child whose decisions need your approval. You can't dismiss my choices just because they don't align with your comfort zones. And you can't withdraw your love and support when I make decisions you don't understand." My mother was crying now, tears streaming down her face in a way that made her look more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. "We know," she whispered. "We know we failed you as parents when you needed us most. We know we let our own fears and limitations prevent us from supporting your dreams. We're so sorry, Althea. We're so proud of you, and we're so sorry we weren't there to see you build something amazing." The apology was everything I'd wanted to hear 3 years ago, but receiving it now felt bittersweet. I was proud of what I'd accomplished, grateful for the independence and confidence I'd developed, but also sad about all the shared experiences we'd missed because of their inability to see beyond their own narrow definitions of success and security. "I forgive you," I said, surprising myself with how easily the words came. "I forgive you, but I also need you to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Our relationship moving forward will be different because I'm different. I've learned to trust myself in ways I never could when I was seeking your approval for every major decision." My father reached across the table and took my other hand, so that both my parents were connected to me in a way that felt both familiar and strange. "We understand," he said. "We want to earn the right to be part of your life again. We want to learn about your business, meet your friends, understand the world you've built for yourself." The gesture was touching, but I knew that rebuilding trust would require more than emotional moments in coffee shops. It would require them to demonstrate over time that they could support my choices even when those choices challenged their assumptions about how life should be lived. "There's something else you should know," I said, pulling out the final document from my folder. "As the new owner of Riverside Heights, I'm implementing some changes to improve the building and the experience for tenants. I'm upgrading the security system, renovating the common areas, and adding amenities like a fitness center and co-working space." I handed them a letter outlining the planned improvements and the associated temporary rent reduction to compensate for construction inconvenience. It was a generous package that would significantly improve their living situation while costing them less money in the short term. "You're reducing our rent?" my mother asked, reading through the letter with amazement. "I'm reducing everyone's rent during the renovation period," I clarified. "This isn't about family. This is about being a responsible property owner who values her tenants' comfort and satisfaction." But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. I could have hired a management company to handle all of this without any personal involvement. I could have improved the building without ever revealing my identity to my parents. The fact that I had chosen to be personally involved, to have this conversation, to own the space where they lived, was absolutely about family and the complicated dynamics of our relationship. "We don't deserve this," my father said quietly. "We don't deserve your generosity after the way we treated you." "This isn't about what you deserve," I replied. "It's about what kind of person I choose to be, what kind of business owner I want to be, what kind of family member I want to be." I've learned that holding on to resentment only hurts the person carrying it. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a familiar face. Maya pushed through the cafe door, scanning the room until she spotted our table. I'd asked her to meet me here after the initial conversation with my parents, knowing that I might need moral support, depending on how things went. "Sorry I'm late," she said, approaching our table with the confident stride of someone who'd spent 3 years helping me navigate challenging business situations. Traffic was worse than I expected. I stood up to hug her, grateful for her presence, and for the reminder that I had built a chosen family of people who believed in me unconditionally. Maya had been there for every late-night strategy session, every celebration of milestones achieved, every moment of doubt when I wondered if my family had been right about the risks I was taking. "Mom, Dad, I'd like you to meet Maya Rodriguez," I said, gesturing between them. "She's been my business partner, my closest friend, and essentially my family for the past 3 years. Maya, these are my parents, Patricia and Robert Morrison." Maya extended her hand with the polished professionalism she'd perfected during our years of client meetings and investor presentations. "It's wonderful to finally meet you," she said warmly. "Althea has told me so much about her family over the years." I could see my parents processing this information, understanding for the first time that I'd built meaningful relationships with people who'd supported my dreams when they couldn't. Maya represented the life I'd created independent of their influence, the success I'd achieved without their guidance or approval. Maya was the one who encouraged me to think bigger when I was still focused on local clients, I explained. She helped me navigate the investment process, the scaling challenges, and eventually the acquisition negotiations. I literally couldn't have built this company without her support and expertise. My mother looked at Maya with something that might have been gratitude or might have been envy. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Thank you for being there for our daughter when we weren't." The acknowledgement was significant, a recognition that other people had filled the roles they'd abdicated when they'd withdrawn their support. It was also an admission that they understood the consequences of their actions had extended, beyond just hurting my feelings, to actually impacting my access to family support during the most challenging period of my life. Maya sat down with us, and I watched my parents adjust to the presence of someone who knew me as the successful entrepreneur I'd become, rather than the struggling dreamer they remembered. Her confidence in my abilities was evident in every comment she made about our business, every story she shared about challenges we'd overcome together. "Althea has this incredible ability to see solutions where other people only see problems," Maya was saying, describing how I'd approached a particularly difficult technical challenge during our second year. "She'll spend weeks understanding every aspect of an issue, talking to customers, researching approaches, and then suddenly she'll have this insight that seems obvious in retrospect but nobody else had thought of." Listening to Maya describe my work habits and problem-solving approach, I realized that this was probably the first time my parents had heard someone speak about my professional capabilities with genuine respect and admiration. For 3 years, they'd been operating from outdated assumptions about who I was and what I could accomplish. "She sounds like a different person than the daughter we remember," my father said, not unkindly but with obvious confusion about how to reconcile the person Maya was describing with their memories of me. "She's not different," Maya replied firmly. "She's exactly the same person. But now she's in an environment where her strengths are recognized and valued instead of dismissed as impractical. The vision, the determination, the willingness to work harder than anyone else, those qualities were always there." The observation hit my parents like a physical blow. Maya was essentially telling them that I hadn't changed, that my potential had always existed, but that their inability to recognize and nurture that potential had prevented them from seeing who I really was. The silence that followed was heavy with implications and regrets. I could see my parents grappling with the reality that they'd failed to understand their own daughter, that they'd let their fears and limitations blind them to my actual capabilities and potential. "We have a lot to learn about who Althea has become," my mother said finally. "We have a lot of catching up to do, a lot of understanding to develop about her world and her work, and a lot of trust to rebuild," I added gently but firmly. "This conversation is a good start, but rebuilding our relationship is going to take time and consistent effort from everyone involved." Maya checked her watch and stood up. "I should let you continue this family conversation," she said diplomatically. "Althea, I'll see you tomorrow for the Netflix call, right?" "Absolutely," I confirmed, standing to hug her goodbye. "Thank you for being here today. It means everything to have your support." After Maya left, my parents and I sat in renewed silence, processing everything that had been said and revealed over the past hour. The weight of 3 years of separation, of missed opportunities and misunderstandings, seemed to settle over our table like a heavy blanket. "What happens now?" my mother asked eventually. "How do we move forward from here?" It was the question I'd been asking myself since I'd first decided to buy their building, since I'd first planned this confrontation, since I'd first achieved the success that proved their doubts wrong. What did I want from this relationship? What was I hoping to rebuild or create? "I don't know," I admitted. "I know I want us to try to have a relationship again. I know I want you to be part of my life. But I also know it's going to be complicated and sometimes difficult. We're all different people than we were 3 years ago." My father nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe we could start slowly. Maybe you could tell us more about your business, help us understand what you've built. Maybe we could meet your other friends, see the world you've created for yourself." The suggestion was reasonable and showed genuine interest in understanding my life, rather than trying to fit me back into their old expectations. It was the kind of approach that might actually lead to a healthier relationship built on mutual respect, rather than conditional approval. "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like you to meet the people who've become my chosen family, see the office where we built something amazing, understand what my daily life actually looks like now." My mother smiled through her tears. "We'd love that. We want to understand your world, your passions, your plans for the future. We want to be the parents you deserve, even if it's later than it should have been." The promise was touching, but I knew that good intentions would need to be backed up by consistent actions over time. Rebuilding trust after such a fundamental betrayal would require patience, understanding, and a willingness from all of us to let go of old patterns and expectations. As we prepared to leave the cafe, I realized that this conversation had been both an ending and a beginning. It was the end of 3 years of separation, 3 years of proving myself without family support, 3 years of building an identity independent of their approval. But it was also the beginning of something new, something that might eventually become a healthier and more honest relationship than we'd ever had before. Walking out into the Denver afternoon, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that the confrontation was over, satisfaction that I'd been able to prove my worth on my own terms, sadness about all the time we'd lost, and cautious optimism about what might be possible if we all committed to doing better. I was no longer the young woman who'd left their apartment with 2 suitcases and a dream they'd dismissed. I was a successful entrepreneur, a proven leader, someone who'd built something meaningful from nothing. But I was also still their daughter, still someone who wanted their love and support, still someone who hoped we could find a way to be family again, on terms that honored who I'd become, rather than trying to force me back into who they'd wanted me to be. The journey home was just beginning. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of phone calls, text messages, and carefully orchestrated meetings, as my parents and I began the delicate process of rebuilding our relationship. They wanted to know everything about my business, my life in Seattle, my plans for the future. I found myself sharing stories I'd never thought I'd get to tell them, explaining technical concepts they'd never shown interest in before, describing challenges and victories they'd missed, because they'd chosen not to be part of my journey. On December 28th, I arranged for them to visit my temporary office space in downtown Denver. I'd rented a small suite for the month to handle the building acquisition and to have a professional space for meetings related to my various business interests. When they walked into the modern office with its glass conference room and wall-mounted monitors displaying real-time analytics from companies I'd invested in, I could see them struggling to reconcile this polished professional environment with their memories of me as an impractical dreamer. "This is where you work now?" my mother asked, running her fingers along the edge of the mahogany conference table. "This is just a temporary space," I explained, pulling up a presentation I'd prepared about my company's growth trajectory. "My main office is in Seattle, but I've been spending time here to handle the property acquisition and to explore some new investment opportunities in the Denver tech scene." I walked them through our company's evolution from a 2-person startup to a 47-person organization that had revolutionized how small businesses manage their operations. I showed them testimonials from clients who credited our platform with helping them expand their businesses, financial projections that demonstrated the scalability of our model, and industry recognition we'd received for innovation in the small business technology space. My father, with his insurance background, was particularly interested in our risk management protocols and how we'd protected the company during periods of rapid growth. "Most startups that scale this quickly run into cash flow problems or operational breakdowns," he observed. "How did you avoid those pitfalls?" The question showed he was finally taking my business seriously, trying to understand the sophisticated planning and execution that had made our success possible. For the first time in our relationship, he was treating me as a peer rather than a child whose decisions needed correction. "We were very deliberate about maintaining strong financial controls even as we grew," I explained, pulling up our cash flow management dashboards. "Maya and I insisted on having at least 6 months of operating expenses in reserve at all times. And we never took on debt to fund expansion. Every new hire, every new office, every new market entry was funded from revenue rather than borrowed money." My mother nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of conservative financial management we always tried to teach you kids." The irony wasn't lost on me that they were now praising me for applying principles they'd thought I was too irresponsible to understand. But I chose not to point out the contradiction, focusing instead on building bridges rather than highlighting past failures in communication. The turning point came when I showed them a video testimonial from Janet Morrison, a bakery owner in Portland whose business had grown from a single storefront to a regional chain of 12 locations using our platform. She wasn't related to us despite sharing our last name, but watching her describe how our technology had transformed her ability to manage inventory, coordinate between locations, and analyze customer trends clearly moved my parents in a way that financial statements and growth charts couldn't. "She started with one small bakery and a dream," Janet said in the video. "Althea's platform gave me the tools to think bigger, to expand without losing control of quality or customer service. I went from working 16-hour days trying to keep track of everything manually to having real-time insights that let me make smart decisions about where to grow next." She didn't just give me software, she gave me my life back. When the video ended, my mother was crying again. "You really did help people," she said softly. "You built something that made other people's dreams possible." "That was always the goal," I replied. "I wanted to create tools that would level the playing field for small business owners, give them access to the same kind of sophisticated management systems that big corporations use. Every feature we developed was designed to solve real problems for real people." My father was studying the client map that showed pins for every business using our platform across the country. 3,000 clients, he murmured. 3,000 small businesses that are more successful because of something you created. The wonder in his voice was unmistakable. He was finally understanding that my success wasn't just about personal achievement or financial gain, but about creating value for thousands of other people. It was the kind of meaningful impact he'd always claimed to value, but he'd been too focused on conventional definitions of career success to recognize it when I'd tried to explain my vision 3 years earlier. That afternoon, I took them to lunch at a restaurant owned by one of our early clients, a woman named Carmen Rodriguez, who'd used our platform to expand from a food truck to a brick-and-mortar location with plans for 2 additional restaurants. When Carmen recognized me and came over to thank me personally for how our software had streamlined her operations, my parents witnessed firsthand the real-world impact of the work they'd once dismissed as impractical. "Your daughter is a genius," Carmen told them enthusiastically. "Her platform cut my food waste by 30% and increased my profit margins by 20%. I was able to secure financing for this location because I could show the bank exactly how efficiently my business was running." After Carmen returned to the kitchen, my parents sat in stunned silence. They were seeing evidence that contradicted every assumption they'd made about my capabilities and the viability of my chosen path. "We were so wrong," my mother said finally. "We were so completely wrong about everything." The admission was gratifying, but it also highlighted how much time we'd lost because of their inability to see beyond their own limited experience. 3 years of separation, 3 years of missed milestones, 3 years of proving myself without the support I'd needed most. "The important thing is that we're here now," I said, choosing grace over resentment. "We can't change the past, but we can decide how we want to move forward." That evening, they insisted on taking me to dinner at their favorite restaurant, a place I remembered from childhood celebrations and family milestones. Sitting in the booth where we'd celebrated my high school graduation, I felt the strange circularity of returning to familiar spaces as a fundamentally different person. "Tell us about Seattle," my mother said over appetizers. "Tell us about your life there, your friends, what you do for fun when you're not revolutionizing small business technology." The question opened up conversations about aspects of my life they'd never shown interest in before. I told them about my apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, about weekend hiking trips in the Cascades, about the community of entrepreneurs and innovators I'd become part of. I described the satisfaction of mentoring other young business owners, the excitement of exploring new investment opportunities, the sense of purpose that came from using my success to create opportunities for others. "It sounds like you've built a really fulfilling life," my father observed. "It sounds like you found exactly what you were looking for when you left here." "I have," I agreed. "But I've also missed having family to share it with." Success feels hollow when you don't have people who've known you forever to celebrate with. The conversation was interrupted by my phone buzzing with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the caller ID. It was a Colorado area code, but not one I recognized. "Excuse me," I said to my parents, stepping away from the table to answer. "This is Althea." "Ms. Morrison? This is Detective Sarah Chen with the Denver Police Department. I'm calling about your property at Riverside Heights Complex. We've received reports of suspicious activity in the building, and we need to speak with you as soon as possible." My blood ran cold. What kind of suspicious activity? "We've had reports of someone attempting to access tenant files and building records without authorization. The security company that monitors your building flagged some unusual activity in the management office. We'd like to meet with you tonight if possible." I glanced back at my parents, who were watching me with concern. "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I told the detective. When I returned to the table, my parents could obviously tell something was wrong. "What happened?" my mother asked immediately. "There's been some kind of security issue at the building," I explained, signaling for the check. "The police want to meet with me right away." My father frowned. "What kind of security issue?" "Someone trying to access tenant records illegally, apparently. I need to get over there and find out what's going on." To my surprise, both my parents stood up when I did. "We're coming with you," my mother declared. "You don't need to do that," I protested. "This is a business matter. I can handle it." "It's our building too," my father said firmly. "We live there. If someone's been trying to access our personal information, we have a right to know what's happening." Their insistence on accompanying me felt like a small but significant shift in our relationship dynamic. Instead of treating me like a child who needed protection from adult responsibilities, they were positioning themselves as partners in dealing with a situation that affected all of us. The drive to Riverside Heights took place mostly in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what we might find when we arrived. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a random break-in attempt, that somehow it was connected to my recent purchase of the building or my newly revealed success. Detective Chen was waiting for us in the parking lot, a tall woman in her 40s, with the kind of serious expression that suggested this wasn't a routine matter. She introduced herself professionally before leading us into the building's management office. The security system recorded someone entering this office at approximately 2:30 a.m. this morning, she explained, showing us timestamps on her tablet. They knew how to disable the alarm system temporarily, which suggests either inside knowledge or significant technical expertise. The office had been searched thoroughly but carefully. File cabinets had been opened and rifled through, but nothing appeared to be damaged or obviously missing. It was the work of someone looking for specific information rather than a random vandalism incident. What were they looking for? I asked, surveying the organized chaos of displaced papers and open drawers. That's what we're hoping you can help us determine, Detective Chen replied. Have you had any threats related to your ownership of this property? Any disputes with former owners, contractors, or other parties who might have reason to access tenant information? I shook my head, but a nagging worry was beginning to form in the back of my mind. The timing of this break-in, just days after my confrontation with my parents, seemed too coincidental to ignore. There's something else, the detective continued. The security footage shows the intruder was specifically focused on tenant files for units on the 4th floor. Does that narrow down what they might have been looking for? My parents and I exchanged glances. The 4th floor was where they lived, along with only 3 other units. If someone was specifically targeting that floor, they were likely looking for information about a specific tenant rather than conducting a general information-gathering operation. We live on the 4th floor, my mother told the detective. Unit 4B, we've been there for 15 years. Detective Chen made notes on her tablet. Have either of you been involved in any disputes recently? Any conflicts with neighbors, former romantic partners, business associates? My parents shook their heads, but I found myself thinking about the broader implications of someone specifically targeting their floor. Who would want information about my parents? Who would know they lived in this building and would go to such lengths to access their personal records? There's something you should know, I said slowly. The fact that I own this building, that I'm their daughter, that I'm back in Denver, it's not public information yet. Very few people know about the connection between me and this property. The detective looked up from her notes with renewed interest. You think this break-in might be related to your business success rather than your parents' tenant status? I don't know, I admitted, but the timing seems suspicious. I just revealed my ownership to my parents a few days ago. If someone was watching the building, monitoring who was coming and going, they might have figured out the connection. My father stepped forward. Are you saying someone might be targeting our family because of Althea's success? I'm saying we should consider all possibilities, Detective Chen replied diplomatically. Ms. Morrison, have you received any threats related to your business activities? Any disputes with competitors, disgruntled employees, or other parties who might have reason to want information about your personal life? I mentally reviewed the past few months, thinking about any interactions that might have seemed off or threatening. The business world was competitive, and successful exits sometimes created resentment among people who felt they deserved a larger share of the profits. But I couldn't think of anyone who would resort to breaking into my parents' building to gather information about me. Nothing specific, I said. But when you achieve a certain level of success, especially as a young woman in tech, you sometimes attract attention from people who question whether you deserve it or who want to find ways to diminish your achievements. The detective nodded knowingly. We see this more often than people realize. Successful individuals, particularly those who've achieved rapid wealth, can become targets for various types of harassment or investigation. She handed me her card and a report number. We're going to continue investigating, but in the meantime, I'd recommend upgrading your personal security measures. Consider hiring a security consultant to review your daily routines, your office security, your home security. This might be an isolated incident, but it's better to be cautious. As we left the management office, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Anger that someone had violated the privacy of my parents' home, concern about what other security risks I might be facing, and guilt that my success might have inadvertently put my family in danger. This is because of me, I said as we walked back to our cars. Someone targeted your building because they wanted information about me. My mother put her arm around my shoulders, a gesture that felt both familiar and new. You don't know that for certain, she said gently. And even if it is, that's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong by being successful. My father nodded in agreement. If someone is trying to find ways to attack you or your reputation, that says something about them, not about you. You've built something meaningful and valuable. Unfortunately, That sometimes makes you a target for people who haven't done the work to achieve their own success. Their support felt surreal after 3 years of separation and criticism. They were defending me, protecting me, standing by me in a way they hadn't been able to do when I'd actually needed their support most. It was both gratifying and painful, a reminder of what our relationship might have been if they'd been able to see past their own fears and limitations earlier. I should hire security for the building, I said, thinking through the immediate practical steps I could take. Better cameras, improved access controls, maybe a security guard for the overnight hours. That's a good idea, Detective Chen agreed, overhearing our conversation. And I'd recommend doing it sooner rather than later. If this was reconnaissance for a larger operation, they might try again. Driving home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this break-in was just the beginning of something larger. Someone had gone to significant effort to access information about my parents, which meant they were likely planning something that required detailed knowledge of my personal life and family connections. I called Maya as soon as I got back to my hotel room, filling her in on everything that had happened since our coffee shop meeting. "This is serious, Althea," she said after I'd described the break-in. "If someone is specifically targeting your family to get to you, that suggests a level of planning and resources that goes beyond ordinary harassment." "I know," I replied, pacing around my hotel room. "I keep thinking about everyone who would have known about the building purchase. Everyone who might have reasons to want to discredit me or find vulnerabilities in my personal life." Maya was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her thinking through the possibilities. What about competitors who lost out on potential acquisition targets? Or investors who felt like they should have been included in your deal? "Maybe," I said, but something about that explanation didn't feel right. This feels more personal than business competition. Someone specifically targeted my parents' information, not my professional records or business data. "Have you considered hiring a private investigator?" Maya suggested. "Someone who specializes in corporate security might be able to identify who's behind this more quickly than the police." The idea had merit. The police would investigate the break-in, but they might not have the resources or expertise to uncover more sophisticated threats related to my business success. A private investigator who understood the tech industry might be better equipped to identify potential sources of this kind of targeted harassment. "I'll look into it," I agreed. "In the meantime, I'm going to upgrade security for the entire building and make sure my parents are protected." After we hung up, I spent the rest of the evening researching security companies and private investigators, trying to find professionals who had experience dealing with threats against high-net-worth individuals in the tech industry. The process was sobering, forcing me to confront the reality that my success had fundamentally changed my risk profile in ways I hadn't fully considered. The next morning brought a call from my building's security company with more disturbing news. A review of the previous week's footage had revealed that the break-in wasn't an isolated incident. Someone had been conducting surveillance on the building for at least 5 days, sitting in a car across the street and photographing people entering and leaving. They were particularly focused on documenting the comings and goings of residents on the 4th floor, the security manager informed me. "We have clear footage of them photographing your parents specifically." The escalation from surveillance to breaking and entering suggested that whoever was behind this had moved from information gathering to active investigation. They weren't just curious about my connection to the building. They were building a comprehensive picture of my family's routines and vulnerabilities. I immediately called my parents to inform them of this development and to discuss enhanced security measures. To my surprise, they didn't seem as alarmed as I expected them to be. "We've been thinking about this overnight," my father said when I reached him at work. "If someone is targeting us to get to you, then the best way to protect everyone is to be proactive about it." "What do you mean?" "We mean we want to help." My mother's voice came through the speakerphone. "We want to be part of figuring out who's behind this and why. We're not going to hide in our apartment while someone threatens our daughter." Their determination to stand by me felt like a complete reversal of their previous pattern of withdrawing support when things became challenging. For the first time in our relationship, they were choosing to face difficulties alongside me rather than encouraging me to avoid them. "I appreciate that," I said, genuinely moved by their support. "But I also don't want to put you in any additional danger." Maybe you should consider staying somewhere else for a few days while we sort this out. Absolutely not, my father replied firmly. We've lived in this building for 15 years. We're not going to be driven out by some coward who's too afraid to confront you directly. Their fierce loyalty was both touching and concerning. I didn't want their newfound support for my choices to put them in harm's way, but I also recognized that trying to protect them by excluding them from the situation might recreate the same dynamic that had damaged our relationship in the first place. Okay, I said finally, but we do this smart. Professional security, coordinated with law enforcement, no unnecessary risks. Agreed, my mother said. What do you need us to do? The question marked a fundamental shift in our family dynamic. Instead of my parents telling me what I should do, they were asking how they could support my decisions and contribute to solving a problem we all face together. It was the kind of partnership I'd always hoped we could have, even if it had taken a security threat to bring it about. Over the next few hours, I put together a comprehensive security plan that included upgraded cameras for the building, a security patrol service, and temporary security details for both my parents and myself. I also hired Rebecca Martinez, a private investigator who specialized in corporate security and had extensive experience dealing with threats against tech executives. When I met with Rebecca that afternoon, she brought a perspective that immediately clarified the seriousness of the situation. Based on what you've described, this isn't random harassment, she told me after reviewing the police reports and security footage. Someone has invested significant time and resources into understanding your personal life and family connections. That level of commitment suggests either a substantial financial motivation or a deeply personal grievance. What kind of financial motivation? I asked. Short selling, industrial espionage, extortion, she listed. If someone could find evidence of financial impropriety or personal scandals, they could potentially profit from damaging your reputation or forcing you to make payments to protect your privacy. The possibility that someone might be trying to manufacture scandals or find leverage against me was deeply unsettling. I'd been careful to maintain high ethical standards throughout my business career, but determined adversaries could potentially twist innocent activities or relationships into something that appeared suspicious. What about personal grievances? I asked. Rebecca's expression grew more serious. That's actually more concerning. Financial motivations have limits. People stop when the cost exceeds the potential profit. Personal vendettas can escalate indefinitely, especially if the person believes they've been wronged in some fundamental way. As I drove back to the hotel that evening, I found myself reviewing every significant relationship and business interaction from the past 3 years, trying to identify anyone who might feel wronged enough to resort to this kind of targeted harassment. The process was exhausting and paranoid-inducing, forcing me to question the motivations of people I'd trusted and worked with. But it also reinforced how much my life had changed since leaving my parents' apartment 3 years ago. I'd built something significant enough that people were willing to invest serious resources in trying to tear it down. In a twisted way, the threats were almost a validation of how far I'd come and how much I'd achieved. The real question was whether I was prepared to handle the challenges that came with success, and whether my newly reconciled family was ready to face those challenges alongside me. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On January 2nd, while I was reviewing security footage with Rebecca Martinez in her downtown office, my phone rang with a call from Carmen Rodriguez, the restaurant owner who had thanked my parents personally just days earlier. Althea, I'm sorry to bother you, but something strange happened today that I thought you should know about, Carmen said, her voice tight with anxiety. A woman came into my restaurant this morning asking very specific questions about you and your family. She claimed to be a journalist working on a story about successful female entrepreneurs, but something felt off about her approach. I put the call on speaker so Rebecca could hear. What kind of questions was she asking? She wanted to know about your relationship with your parents, whether you'd mentioned any family conflicts or personal struggles when we worked together. She kept pushing for details about your background, your education, whether you'd ever talked about feeling like an outsider in your family. Carmen paused. When I told her I didn't feel comfortable discussing your personal life, she offered me money for information. That's when I knew something wasn't right. Rebecca leaned forward, her expression sharpening with professional interest. Did you get her name? Any contact information? She gave me a business card, but I looked up the publication she claimed to work for, and they've never heard of her. I took a picture of her when she left, though. I hope that was okay. That was perfect, I assured her. Can you send me both the photo and a picture of the business card? Within minutes, my phone buzzed with Carmen's messages. The business card looked professional but generic, the kind that could be printed at any office supply store. The photo showed a woman in her 30s with short blonde hair and expensive-looking clothes, someone who could easily blend into the professional environments where she'd been conducting her inquiries. Rebecca studied the images with the analytical intensity I'd learned to associate with her work. I've seen this woman before, she said suddenly. Not in person, but in corporate databases. Give me a few minutes to run facial recognition. While Rebecca worked at her computer, I called Maya to update her on this development. The fact that someone was actively approaching my business associates with offers of money for personal information elevated the threat to a completely different level. This isn't just surveillance anymore, Maya said after I'd explained the situation. This is active investigation with financial incentives. Someone is building a comprehensive dossier on your personal life and family relationships. But why? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. What could they possibly gain? From information about my relationship with my parents? Think about it, Maya replied. Your success story is inspirational, precisely because you overcame family rejection to build something extraordinary. If someone could demonstrate that your family narrative was fabricated, that you actually had hidden family support or financial backing, it could seriously damage your credibility and reputation. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Someone was trying to prove that my success story was a lie, that I hadn't actually built my company independently, that my claims of overcoming family rejection were manufactured for publicity purposes. In an era where authentic personal narratives were crucial for business credibility, especially for female entrepreneurs, such accusations could be devastating. Got her, Rebecca announced, turning her monitor toward me. The facial recognition software had identified the woman as Linda Foster, a private investigator based in Chicago who specialized in what her website euphemistically called reputation research. Her client list included law firms, opposition research organizations, and what appeared to be wealthy individuals engaged in various types of personal disputes. She's expensive, Rebecca noted, scrolling through Linda Foster's professional background. Her standard rate is $500 per day plus expenses. If someone hired her to conduct this level of comprehensive investigation, they're spending serious money to build a case against you. I stared at Linda Foster's professional headshot, trying to understand what kind of person would invest tens of thousands of dollars in an attempt to discredit my success story. The effort required suggested either business competition at the highest levels or personal animosity that went far beyond normal professional rivalry. Can you find out who hired her? I asked. Rebecca nodded grimly. That's going to require some creative research, but yes. In the meantime, you should probably warn everyone in your network that they might be approached by people claiming to be journalists or researchers. The more prepared your associates are, the less likely they are to inadvertently provide information that could be taken out of context. Spending the rest of the afternoon making warning calls to business partners, former employees, college friends, and anyone else who might be contacted was an exhausting exercise in damage control. Each conversation required explaining a situation I didn't fully understand myself, asking people to be cautious about sharing information while trying not to sound paranoid or defensive. The most difficult call was to David Chen, my former mentor at the university. David had been instrumental in my early development as an entrepreneur, and his endorsement had opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. If someone could twist his memories of our relationship or suggest impropriety in our mentor-student dynamic, it could damage both our reputations. I've actually already been contacted, David told me when I reached him at his office. A woman called yesterday claiming to be writing an academic paper about mentorship in entrepreneurship programs. She wanted to know about our working relationship, whether I'd provided you with any financial support or business connections that weren't available to other students. My stomach dropped. What did you tell her? The truth. That you were an exceptionally talented student who earned every opportunity you received through hard work and innovation. That our relationship was entirely professional and appropriate. That your success came from your own vision and determination. He paused. But I could tell she was hoping for a different answer. She kept pushing for details about university policies, about whether mentor relationships ever crossed ethical boundaries. The implication was clear. Someone was trying to build a narrative that my success had been facilitated by inappropriate relationships or hidden advantages, rather than earned through legitimate effort. It was a particularly insidious attack, because it played into existing stereotypes about how women achieved success in male-dominated industries. David, I'm so sorry you've been dragged into this, I said, feeling genuine anguish about the situation. I never intended for my success to create problems for the people who helped me along the way. Don't apologize for achieving something extraordinary, he replied firmly. Whoever is behind this investigation is counting on you feeling guilty about your success, hoping you'll retreat or compromise rather than defend what you've built. Don't give them that satisfaction. His words reminded me of the fierce determination that had sustained me through 3 years of building a company from nothing. I'd overcome family rejection, financial uncertainty, and countless business challenges by refusing to accept other people's limitations on what I could achieve. I wasn't going to let some shadowy investigation derail the confidence and independence I'd fought so hard to develop. That evening, I met my parents for dinner at a quiet restaurant where we could talk privately about the escalating situation. They'd spent the day dealing with their own concerns about building security and personal safety, but they seemed more determined than ever to stand by me rather than retreat from the conflict. We've been thinking about who might have reasons to want to discredit you, my father said after I'd updated them on Linda Foster's investigation. And we keep coming back to the same question. Who benefits if your reputation is damaged? It was a logical approach that reflected his years of experience in insurance, where determining motivation was crucial for understanding risk and liability. But as I considered the question, I realized the potential beneficiaries were more numerous than I'd initially assumed. Business competitors who lost market share to our company, I began listing. Investors who were excluded from our funding rounds. Former employees who felt they deserved larger equity stakes. Other entrepreneurs who resent the attention and recognition our success has received. My mother frowned thoughtfully. But would any of those people have access to information about our family situation? Whoever hired this investigator knew enough about our relationship to focus specifically on family conflicts and personal background. She was right. The investigation's focus on family dynamics suggested that whoever was behind it had inside knowledge about our 3-year estrangement and my claims of building the company without family support. That narrowed the field considerably, pointing towards someone who had been close enough to my business or personal life to understand the significance of family relationships to my public narrative. Maya, I said suddenly, then immediately felt guilty for even considering the possibility. I mean, not Maya specifically, but someone in my inner circle. Someone who knew about the family situation and understood how central it was to my identity as an entrepreneur. My parents exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the idea that someone I trusted might be working against me. But Rebecca had warned me that the most damaging betrayals often came from people who had legitimate access to personal information and credible reasons for knowing intimate details about someone's life. Who else knows the complete story? My father asked gently. Who knows about our fight 3 years ago? About how you built the company independently? About why those details matter to your professional reputation? I mentally reviewed the people who had full knowledge of my background and family situation. Maya obviously knew everything, but the idea of her betraying me was unthinkable. Tom Chen, my former investor, knew most of the story but had always been supportive of my independence. Various employees and business partners knew pieces of the narrative, but few had the complete picture. Then I remembered someone I'd tried to forget. Jason Walsh, my former boyfriend who'd broken up with me 6 months before the company sale because he couldn't handle dating someone more successful than him. Jason had been present for many of my conversations about family conflicts, had heard me describe the pain of being rejected by people whose approval I'd desperately wanted. Jason, I said aloud, the name feeling bitter in my mouth. Jason Walsh. We dated for almost 2 years, right through the period when the company was scaling rapidly. He knew everything about my family situation, about my motivation for proving them wrong, about how much their rejection had hurt me. My mother's expression hardened. The man who broke up with you because your success made him feel inadequate? I nodded, remembering the painful conversation where Jason had accused me of caring more about my business than our relationship, of making him feel like a failure by comparison. He'd been particularly resentful about media coverage that portrayed me as a self-made entrepreneur who'd overcome family opposition, claiming that I was exaggerating our conflicts for publicity purposes. He always insisted that I was playing up the family drama for sympathy, I explained. He thought I was being unfair to you, making our disagreements sound worse than they actually were to create a more compelling success story. My father's jaw tightened with anger. So he's trying to prove that our rejection wasn't real? That our conflicts were manufactured for publicity? If he could demonstrate that my family narrative was exaggerated or false, it would undermine the authenticity that's been crucial to my professional credibility, I said, the pieces finally clicking together. Female entrepreneurs are constantly questioned about whether their success is legitimate. Any suggestion that I fabricated personal struggles for marketing purposes could be devastating. The revelation was simultaneously relieving and infuriating. Relieving because it identified a specific source for the investigation rather than some mysterious corporate conspiracy. Infuriating because it represented such a petty and vindictive response to a relationship that had ended over his own insecurities. "What do we do now?" my mother asked. "How do we prove that our conflicts were real without giving him the ammunition he's looking for?" It was a sophisticated question that showed she understood the complexity of the situation. Simply acknowledging the investigation could backfire by drawing attention to questions about my background that most people had never thought to ask. But ignoring it allowed Jason to continue building his case without any response or counter-narrative. We document everything, I decided. Every conversation we had 3 years ago. Every witness to our conflicts. Every piece of evidence that demonstrates the reality of what happened between us. If he wants to make this public, we'll be ready with facts that support our version of events. My parents nodded in agreement, and I felt a profound sense of partnership that had been missing from our relationship for most of my life. Instead of trying to protect me from conflict or encouraging me to avoid confrontation, they were preparing to stand with me and defend the truth of our shared history. The irony wasn't lost on me that the person trying to prove our family conflicts were fabricated had actually succeeded in bringing us closer together than we'd ever been before. Jason's investigation had forced us to examine our relationship honestly, to acknowledge our mistakes, and to commit to a stronger foundation built on mutual respect rather than conditional approval. As we prepared to leave the restaurant, my phone buzzed with a call from Rebecca Martinez. She'd been working all day to trace Linda Foster's client, and her tone suggested she'd found something significant. "I know who hired the investigator," she said without preamble. "And you're not going to like it." "It wasn't Jason Walsh," Rebecca said, her voice carrying a weight that made my stomach drop. "The payments to Linda Foster came from a shell company registered in Delaware, but I was able to trace the funding back through several layers. The money came from Meridian Capital Partners." The name hit me like a physical blow. Meridian Capital was the investment firm run by Richard Sterling, a venture capitalist who tried aggressively to get involved in our funding rounds during the company's growth phase. When we declined his investment offers in favor of maintaining control with our existing partners, he'd become increasingly hostile, suggesting publicly that we were making naive decisions that would ultimately lead to failure. "Sterling," I breathed, remembering his parting words after our final meeting. He'd predicted that companies like mine, led by inexperienced entrepreneurs with more ambition than business sense, inevitably collapsed under the weight of their own unrealistic expectations. When our acquisition had been announced, proving his predictions spectacularly wrong, he'd maintained a conspicuous silence that I now realized had been ominous rather than gracious. "There's more," Rebecca continued. "The investigation wasn't just about discrediting your family narrative. Foster was also building a case that your company's financials were misleading, that your growth metrics were artificially inflated, that the acquisition price was based on fraudulent representations of your market position. My parents listened in stunned silence as Rebecca explained the scope of Sterling's attack. He wasn't just trying to damage my reputation. He was attempting to build a comprehensive case that would question every aspect of my success, from my personal authenticity to my professional competence. He's trying to destroy everything I've built, I said, the full implications of his strategy becoming clear. If he can create doubt about my integrity and my company's legitimacy, it damages not just my reputation, but the value of everything we created. My father's expression had turned thunderous. This man is trying to destroy our daughter's career because she refused to give him what he wanted? Because his ego couldn't handle being told no? It's worse than that, Rebecca explained. Sterling has been systematically approaching other entrepreneurs who declined his investment offers, attempting to build patterns of what he calls market manipulation and, quote, investor fraud. He's positioning himself as someone who protects the investment community from unscrupulous operators. The audacity of his campaign was breathtaking. Sterling was trying to rewrite the narrative of his failed investment attempts, transforming his rejections into evidence of his superior judgment and due diligence. By discrediting successful companies that had refused his involvement, he could claim credit for having identified problems that others had missed. What's our legal recourse? I asked, though I suspected the answer wouldn't be encouraging. Rebecca's expression confirmed my fears. Limited. Most of what he's doing falls under the category of legitimate business research. As long as Foster doesn't misrepresent herself or break any laws in gathering information, investigating publicly traded companies and their executives is generally protected activity. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. So we fight back with the truth, she said firmly. We make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of person would stoop to these tactics. Her fierce protectiveness was both touching and surprising. 3 years ago, she'd been embarrassed by my unconventional choices and worried about what people would think of our family's support for risky ventures. Now she was prepared to go to war to defend the reputation I'd built through those same choices. Actually, I said slowly, an idea beginning to form. I think there's a better approach than just defending ourselves. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I was looking for. David Kim, an investigative journalist at TechCrunch who'd covered our acquisition and had been interested in writing a follow-up story about female entrepreneurs in the post-exit environment. David, it's Althea Morrison. Remember you mentioned wanting to do a piece about the challenges successful entrepreneurs face after major exits? I think I have a story that might interest you. Over the next 20 minutes, I explained Sterling's campaign to David, providing him with Rebecca's documentation of the investigation and the broader pattern of attacks on entrepreneurs who'd refused Meridian's investment offers. David's excitement was palpable as he realized the scope of the story. This is bigger than just your situation, he said. If Sterling is systematically targeting entrepreneurs who rejected his investments, that's a pattern of potential market manipulation and harassment that the entire tech community needs to know about. There's something else, I added, glancing at my parents. The personal angle of this story is that Sterling's investigation actually helped reunite me with my family. His attempts to prove our conflicts were fake forced us to examine our relationship honestly and rebuild it on a stronger foundation. My father smiled at this unexpected silver lining. So his plan to destroy your family narrative actually ended up creating the family unity he was trying to disprove? Exactly, I replied. He wanted to show that my success story was manufactured, but instead he created a real reconciliation that proved the authenticity of both our conflicts and our love for each other. David was practically laughing by the time I finished explaining the ironies of Sterling's failed strategy. This is perfect. A vindictive investor whose attempts at revenge actually strengthen the very relationships he was trying to exploit. It's like a business karma story. When do you want to publish? I asked. I need about 48 hours to contact Sterling for comment and verify some of the documentation, but this should run by the end of the week. And Althea, thank you for trusting me with this story. It's exactly the kind of accountability journalism our industry needs. After ending the call, I sat back and looked at my parents, these people who'd gone from dismissing my dreams to standing ready to defend them against sophisticated attacks. The transformation in our relationship had been more dramatic than anything I could have imagined when I'd first decided to buy their building. "I need to ask you something," I said, suddenly emotional. "When this story comes out, when David writes about our family conflicts and reconciliation, are you prepared for that level of public attention? Are you comfortable with our personal story becoming part of the business narrative?" My mother didn't hesitate. "We're proud of you," she said simply. "We're proud of what you've built, proud of how you've handled these attacks, proud to be your parents. If sharing our story helps protect other entrepreneurs from this kind of harassment, then we're honored to be part of that." My father nodded in agreement. "We made mistakes 3 years ago, but we're not going to make the same mistake twice. Whatever comes next, we're facing it together as a family." The article ran 3 days later with the headline, "When Venture Capitalists Attack, How Rejection Revenge is Poisoning Startup Culture." David's piece was meticulously researched and devastating in its documentation of Sterling's pattern of targeting entrepreneurs who'd rejected his investment offers. The personal story of my family reconciliation provided an emotional centerpiece that demonstrated the human cost of such vindictive campaigns. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Other entrepreneurs came forward with their own stories of harassment from Sterling and similar investors. The SEC announced an investigation into potential market manipulation. Meridian Capital's other portfolio companies began distancing themselves from the firm. But the most satisfying response came from an unexpected source. LinkedIn messages from dozens of young entrepreneurs, particularly women, thanking me for demonstrating that success was possible even without traditional support systems, and that family relationships could be rebuilt even after serious conflicts. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated community room at Riverside Heights Complex, looking out at an audience of aspiring entrepreneurs who'd gathered for the first Denver Women in Tech meetup I was hosting in my parents' building. My mother and father sat in the front row, beaming with pride, as I shared lessons about perseverance, authenticity, and the importance of defining success on your own terms. Sterling's investigation had failed spectacularly, but it had succeeded in ways he'd never intended. It had brought my family together, strengthened my relationships with business partners and friends, and created opportunities to help other entrepreneurs facing similar challenges. As I concluded my presentation, I caught sight of Maya in the audience, grinning as she recorded video for the company's social media accounts. Next to her sat Carmen Rodriguez and several other local business owners whose success stories had become intertwined with mine. "The most important lesson I've learned," I told the audience, "is that success isn't just about proving doubters wrong. It's about building something meaningful with people who believe in your vision and never letting anyone else's limitations define what's possible for your life." After the event, my parents and I walked to the building's rooftop garden, another improvement I'd added during the renovations. The Denver skyline stretched out before us, lights twinkling in the gathering dusk. "Do you ever regret buying this building?" my mother asked, settling onto one of the benches overlooking the city. I considered the question seriously. The purchase had been motivated by a desire to prove my worth, to demonstrate my success in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. But it had evolved into something much more meaningful. "No," I said finally, "I bought this building to prove a point about who I'd become. But it ended up teaching me something more important about who we could become together." My father put his arm around my shoulders. "We're sorry it took us so long to see what was right in front of us," he said quietly. "We're sorry we almost missed the chance to be part of your incredible journey." "We didn't miss it," I replied, leaning into his embrace. "We just took a longer route to get here. But sometimes the longer route teaches you things you wouldn't have learned any other way." As we sat together watching the city lights, I realized that Sterling's attempt to destroy my success had actually completed it in ways I'd never anticipated. He'd wanted to prove that my achievements were built on lies, but instead he'd helped me build something more authentic and meaningful than anything I could have created alone. The girl who'd left this building 3 years ago with 2 suitcases and a dream had become a woman who owned the building, led a thriving company, and had the unshakable support of family who'd learned to believe in her vision. It wasn't the revenge I'd originally planned, but it was something much better. It was the kind of success that no one could ever take away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.